Most teams react to defeat in predictable ways. They question the referee, vent their frustration in post-match interviews, and eventually move on. Egypt chose a completely different path. Less than 24 hours after their dramatic World Cup exit against Argentina in one of the tournament's most fiercely debated matches, the Egyptian Football Association took an extraordinary step. Instead of simply expressing disappointment, it submitted a formal complaint to FIFA, demanded a thorough investigation into the officiating, and called for the entire refereeing crew to be removed from the remainder of the competition. This wasn't an emotional outburst or a routine protest. It was an official challenge from a national football federation, openly accusing football's governing body of failing to ensure a fair contest. That decision immediately placed FIFA in an incredibly difficult position because no matter how the organization responds, the controversy isn't going away. The issue has become far bigger than one match, and every move FIFA makes from this point forward will be closely scrutinized. Egypt's official statement carried far more weight than the usual frustration that follows a controversial defeat. The federation declared it could not remain silent about what it described as serious refereeing mistakes and a failure to properly apply the video assistant referee system. According to the statement, several key decisions during the match raised major concerns over consistency and fairness, with those calls directly influencing the outcome. The federation emphasized that defending the rights of the national team was not something that could be ignored or treated as a secondary issue. Federation President Hani Abo Rida went even further, personally criticizing French referee François Letixier for what he described as inconsistent officiating and a clear double standard. He argued that those decisions ultimately cost Egypt the match and insisted that FIFA not only investigate the incidents but also remove the entire officiating team from the tournament. In other words, Egypt wasn't merely asking questions, they were directly telling FIFA that its officials had played a decisive role in ending their World Cup journey. What made the complaint even more significant was that Egypt wasn't standing alone with these accusations. A growing number of respected football figures had watched the same incidents and reached remarkably similar conclusions. The biggest source of Egypt's frustration centered around two controversial moments that completely changed the course of the match. While leading 1-0, Egypt appeared to double their advantage through Zizou after a brilliant attacking move that began deep inside their own half. However, VAR reviewed the build-up nearly 20 seconds earlier, identifying a shirt pull and a challenge involving Marwan Ashia before recommending the goal be ruled out. Moments that seemed disconnected from the scoring move suddenly became the reason Egypt's second goal disappeared. Then came another controversial incident in stoppage time with the score level. Egyptian players appealed passionately for a foul inside Argentina's penalty area after Hamdi Fathi appeared to be pulled while Mohamed Salah became involved in another physical challenge. This time, however, VAR chose not to recommend an on-field review. Play continued immediately. Argentina launched a counterattack and within moments scored the winning goal. It was a dramatic sequence that left Egyptian players, coaches, and supporters convinced they had been treated differently. In two nearly identical situations, what strengthened Egypt's position was the reaction from numerous respected analysts and former professionals who had no personal connection to either team. Former England goalkeeper Rob Green questioned whether the disallowed Egyptian goal should ever have been reviewed, arguing that the supposed foul occurred far too early in the attacking move. Alan Shearer highlighted what he believed was an obvious inconsistency, suggesting that if one incident was considered a foul, then the later challenge involving Salah should have been judged the same way. Ian Wright echoed that opinion, insisting both situations deserved equal treatment. Jamie Carragher also expressed surprise, stating that in most top European leagues the goal would likely have stood even after a video review. Criticism wasn't limited to English pundits either. German refereeing experts also weighed in, with Patrick Ittrich openly describing Egypt's late penalty appeal as a genuine spot kick while arguing that the majority of controversial decisions had gone against the African side. When experienced voices from different countries and different football backgrounds all begin questioning the same decisions, the discussion naturally shifts from emotional disappointment to legitimate concern. The timing of Egypt's complaint created an even bigger challenge for FIFA, because it arrived during a tournament already surrounded by repeated controversies. Belgium had previously lodged a complaint following the reversal of a red card decision involving one of its players. Ecuador protested after claiming Mexican supporters deliberately disrupted the team's preparations by creating excessive noise outside their hotel the night before a crucial match. Iran also filed objections regarding travel arrangements that repeatedly forced the squad to cross the United States-Mexico border throughout the group stage. Suddenly, 4 different national federations had each raised separate concerns during the same World Cup, all pointing toward issues involving FIFA's management of the tournament. At that point, it no longer looked like a series of isolated incidents. Instead, it began to resemble a troubling pattern that many football observers could no longer ignore. Adding even more pressure was the earlier controversy involving the suspension of a red card after reports that the President of the United States had personally contacted FIFA, with the governing body relying on a regulation that had reportedly never been used before at a World Cup. Whether justified or not, that episode damaged public confidence, and every controversy that followed was judged through the same lens. By the time Egypt submitted its complaint, FIFA's credibility was already under intense scrutiny, making this dispute far more significant than a single refereeing decision. Egypt were not shouting into empty space. By the time their complaint reached FIFA, frustration had been building throughout the tournament, and theirs had simply become the loudest voice. Inside Egypt's camp, emotions boiled over immediately after the final whistle. Head coach Hassam Hassan didn't hide his feelings, claiming the match had been manipulated and suggesting the tournament organizers wanted Lionel Messi and Argentina to remain in contention. Forward Zizou was equally direct, insisting that the referee had erased the hard work of an entire nation. Whether those accusations are true or not is almost beside the point, because once a member federation formally questions the integrity of a World Cup match, FIFA is forced to respond. Ignoring such allegations was never an option. Yet the way FIFA chose to answer only intensified the debate. Instead of announcing an independent review or acknowledging public concern, the organization immediately stood behind its officials. FIFA's head of refereeing, Pierluigi Collina, issued a firm statement rejecting the accusations outright. He described the claims as baseless, defended the integrity of World Cup referees, and warned that public attacks on officials often lead to abuse and threats directed at both referees and their families. He also stressed that FIFA's refereeing department operates independently and cannot be influenced by anyone, including FIFA President Gianni Infantino. Beyond defending the officials in general, Collina addressed the disputed incidents one by one. He explained that under the current interpretation of the attacking possession phase, there is no time limit preventing VAR from reviewing a foul earlier in the build-up to a goal. According to FIFA's interpretation, Marwan Ash's challenge justified overturning Egypt's second goal. As for the late appeal involving Mohamed Salah, Collina maintained that the contact fell within the normal physical nature of football and did not warrant a penalty. To many observers, however, FIFA's response seemed less like the beginning of an investigation and more like a final verdict delivered before any investigation had even begun. One detail inside Collina's statement drew particular attention. He initially claimed FIFA prefers not to comment publicly on specific refereeing incidents while a tournament is still in progress. Yet almost immediately afterward, he spent several paragraphs carefully explaining why both controversial decisions had been correct. He effectively reviewed the incidents himself, presenting detailed reasoning that supported the referee's calls. Critics argued that this contradicted his own position. If FIFA truly intended to remain neutral until every concern had been examined, why publicly defend the decisions in such detail? That contradiction fueled even more suspicion among supporters who already believed the governing body had chosen its side. At the same time, it's important to recognize that FIFA's explanation wasn't entirely without merit. According to the laws of the game, stepping on an opponent's foot is indeed considered a foul, and the current VAR protocol does not impose a strict distance or time limit when reviewing the attacking phase leading to a goal. Likewise, physical contact inside the penalty area is not automatically enough to award a penalty if the defender is judged to have made a legitimate challenge. Even Patrick Ittrich, one of the German referees who believed Egypt deserved a late penalty, acknowledged that the VAR procedure itself had technically followed the existing regulations. That distinction matters because applying the law correctly is not always the same as applying it consistently. FIFA could legitimately argue that its officials followed the written rules, while critics could just as reasonably argue those same rules were enforced differently depending on the situation. Both positions can exist at the same time, which explains why the debate became so intense. There is also another point that deserves attention. Kalina's warning about threats directed at referees should not be dismissed. Match officials regularly face extreme online abuse after controversial decisions, and in many cases that criticism extends far beyond football. No disagreement over officiating justifies harassment or personal attacks against referees or their families. That reality should remain separate from any discussion about whether mistakes were made during the match itself. Referees are human, and they inevitably make difficult decisions under enormous pressure. Accepting that fact, however, does not prevent legitimate scrutiny when those decisions appear inconsistent. It is entirely possible for someone to believe the officials acted in good faith while also believing they made significant errors that influenced the outcome. The challenge for FIFA is that public trust depends not only on correct decisions but also on transparency. When supporters feel that controversial incidents are immediately dismissed instead of openly reviewed, confidence in the process naturally begins to erode. This is where the situation becomes almost impossible for FIFA to manage. Consider the choices available. If the governing body officially clears the refereeing team after an internal review, many critics will see that outcome as confirmation that FIFA simply protects its own officials regardless of what happened on the pitch. Given the earlier controversies surrounding the tournament, such a decision would reinforce existing suspicions instead of calming them. On the other hand, if FIFA quietly removes Francois Letexer and his officiating crew from the remaining matches, it creates an entirely different problem. Such a move would inevitably be interpreted as an admission that serious mistakes occurred. If the officials are judged unfit to continue, then people will naturally question whether Argentina advanced because of incorrect refereeing decisions. In other words, either outcome damages FIFA's credibility. Defending the referees risks accusations of a cover-up, while replacing them risks validating every conspiracy theory already circulating online. There is no solution capable of restoring complete confidence because the damage has already been done. Regardless of what FIFA ultimately decides, millions of supporters have already formed their own conclusions, and changing those perceptions may prove far more difficult than resolving the complaint itself. The next few days will reveal more than any official statement ever could. FIFA rarely discusses the internal evaluations it conducts after each match, and decisions regarding refereeing appointments are usually made quietly behind closed doors. The officials selected for the quarterfinals, semifinals, third-place playoff, and final are typically announced shortly before each game. That means many observers will be paying close attention to one detail above all others. If Francois Letexer and his officiating team simply disappear from the remaining appointments without any public explanation, plenty of people will interpret that silence as an admission that something went wrong. FIFA may never openly acknowledge an error, but the absence of those officials would speak loudly enough on its own. On the other hand, if the same referees continue receiving high-profile matches, critics will argue that the governing body has ignored Egypt's complaint entirely. Either way, FIFA has been pushed into a position where every decision carries consequences. Egypt's protest has created a situation in which the organization risks appearing guilty whether it changes course or stands by its original position. Instead of controlling the narrative, FIFA now finds itself reacting to it. As the controversy continued to grow, fresh decisions only added more fuel to the debate. For the quarter-final between France and Morocco, FIFA appointed an all-Argentine officiating team during the very same week it was facing accusations of showing favoritism toward Argentina. Even supporters who rejected conspiracy theories struggle to understand the timing of that appointment. It raised unnecessary questions at a moment when the organization desperately needed to rebuild trust. Around the football world, skepticism began spreading beyond Egypt. Reports suggested that even the English Football Association jokingly discussed appealing one of its own disciplinary decisions, with many asking why certain rules appeared flexible in some situations but rigid in others. The controversy gradually evolved beyond a single refereeing performance and became a broader discussion about consistency, transparency, and confidence in football's governing institutions. Once public trust begins to disappear, every future decision is viewed through a lens of suspicion. Even routine appointments suddenly become headline news because people stop judging individual actions and start questioning the entire system behind them. For Egypt, however, the emotional impact runs far deeper than debates about officiating procedures. This World Cup had already become the greatest tournament in the country's football history. They celebrated their first ever World Cup victory, reached the knockout stage for the first time, and secured a historic knockout win that inspired millions of supporters back home. For a nation with 7 Africa Cup of Nations titles but decades of World Cup disappointment, this tournament represented a long-awaited breakthrough. A place in the quarterfinals was within touching distance. With only minutes remaining, they believed they were on the verge of achieving something no Egyptian team had ever accomplished before. Instead, the dream slipped away amid decisions that many fans and experts continue to dispute. That sense of injustice is what makes the pain so lasting. Losing to a clearly superior opponent is one thing. Believing history was taken away by controversial officiating is something supporters carry for years, regardless of whether every decision was technically correct according to the laws of the game. Countless Egyptian fans will always feel that the rules were applied differently when it mattered most. Meanwhile, Argentina marched on to face Switzerland, keeping alive their dream of winning consecutive World Cup titles. Their players celebrated an unforgettable comeback, while Egyptian football was left wondering what might have been. In the middle of it all sits FIFA, holding a formal complaint that has become far larger than a single match report. Every possible response threatens to damage the organization's credibility in one way or another. If it fully supports its officials, accusations of protecting its own will continue. If it quietly sidelines the refereeing team, many will see that as an indirect admission that costly mistakes were made. Egypt's federation did far more than protest a controversial defeat. It placed the integrity of the tournament itself under the spotlight and challenged FIFA to defend its processes in front of the entire football world. Whatever decision follows, this controversy has already left a lasting mark on the tournament. Long after the final whistle of the World Cup, the debate over fairness, consistency, and trust in football's highest authority is likely to continue. The biggest question now is not simply whether Egypt was wronged, but whether FIFA can convince the football world that its decisions deserve complete confidence once again.